a lot of silence in the beginning.
Hey, that's real though.
It's real. Nobody wants to go first. Nobody ever, in any situation, nobody wants to go first because they're scared of what people will think in that moment. So I have to step up and I have to talk around my own story.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Plumm Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR, and I am joined by Tommy Hatto. In today's episode, we talk about the power of storytelling as an enabler of culture. But before we go, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe this podcast, as it allows us to keep having these great conversations week on week. Tommy, hi.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. I feel, from my perspective anyway, long time coming. We've been on LinkedIn, and I also saw you were nominated at the event. So that was back in, I think it was January, February, the Great British Workplace Wellbeing. For me, seeing you on there as well, I was like, right, okay, someday will happen where we'll be talking, and it just so happens we're in the studio in London today.
It's crazy, right? It's funny. It's funny because there's a lot of people on LinkedIn that I see, or online, and yourself included, where you kind of feel like you know them. And then it's not until we got on a call where I'm like, actually, I don't think we've ever actually met, but I feel like I know you. But yeah, I mean, congrats on winning.
Thank you.
So that's awesome.
Thank you. Big moment for me last year. Most inspiring HR leader of the year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, really proud of myself. But anyway, we are here to talk about you. And first things first, there's a question I like to ask every single guest. It allows our listeners to get to know you a little bit better. And the question is, was HR part of the plan, or did you fall into the space by chance?
Never part of the plan. Same as everything in my life. Kind of just fell into it, really. And what we're going to talk about kind of covers how I got into this space too, in terms of the storytelling.
Perfect. Let's jump in on storytelling.
Let's do it.
So storytelling, we're going to talk about this in the context of how we can really start to build engagement and culture within the context of work. And how would you, for our listeners, how would you explain storytelling in a way that it can drive culture?
Yeah, so the way I like to explain it, for a second, let's forget about storytelling and HR being together. Let's focus on what storytelling means. And if you think around stories, whether that's in books or that's in film, when you're reading a book, when you're watching a movie, and you're, kind of partly playing out that story, all of those different emotions that you go through, that kind of resonation with the characters, feeling you want them to win, you cry with them, you win with them, and you're happy with them. Those types of emotions, they're not just particular to a fictional film or a book. These things happen in real life too. So why can't we take that idea and theory around storytelling, and how do we bring people on board, and how do we engage people, and how do we get them to resonate with the people in our lives into the workplace? And that's how I like to break it down, is actually everybody has a story, and we all have the ability to bring people on a journey with us. And companies especially can use that to engage people, because you want people to win with you. You want people to win with what your company mission is. You want people to be on board with where you're going, what your vision is. So they're not too dissimilar in terms of storytelling and the corporate workplace.
I absolutely love that. And you're the first person that I've actually ever heard explain it like that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking that makes so much sense. Like, why are we not putting such an emphasis on this in the workplace? Because you're so right. Each and every one of us have our own story, and it's very unique to us. But sometimes we don't know how to tell that story.
Right. Yeah. And what's really important is every single individual will identify with the story, but not the same story. So that's why we need a variety of different stories, because, you can read one book and I'll read anything. Actually, you can cry at a film and it does nothing to me. But actually, I'll cry at a different film and does nothing to you, and that's why we need different stories within the workplace. And, back to your question in terms of, being quite challenging and difficult to embrace your story and start to talk about it. It can be challenging. It can be scary. It can be very scary to kind of walk that path. But I think it's starting off small. It's not around standing up in front of your whole organization and saying, I have a story to tell, listen to me. It's not about that. It's just about sharing, really small nuggets of information about you as a person. Doesn't need to be about your personal life if you don't want it to be. I think that's where the misconception is that when we talk around storytelling, people feel like they need to bare their soul. It's not. It's just around pieces of information that resonate with you, that you want to instill in other people and in organizations, is around, your values. So what stories, what anecdotes, what things can you say from your experience that can get people to have that light bulb moment to think, wow, okay, they get it. I'm going to be on that journey with them.
You just started talking then about people feeling that they've got to divulge their personal life in order to start to build that connection through the storytelling. Are you ever faced with people feeling that that's a barrier when it comes to telling their story?
Oh, for sure. I mean, even I suffer from it sometimes, when people are asking around stories, and I think, how can I find something about myself? How can I be as vulnerable as possible? Because a lot of people talk around vulnerability at the moment. And how do I express that vulnerability, even though I'm a bit reserved with actually wanting to share that information because it's private? And I do hear that a lot when I speak with organizations, when I speak with CEOs or, directors and leaders. They don't want to divulge personal details about themselves because A, it could be unprofessional and unrelated, and B, they're actually, they're not comfortable with that. And it's not around forcing people to say stuff that they're not comfortable with, but it's around thinking around what the end result of what you're going to say is going to achieve. What impact is that going to have? What actions do you want to take from that? And thinking around those small anecdotes to be like, okay, I want to build a culture where people are inclusive. So let me share some experiences that I've had around inclusivity. And that could be things that have happened to me, or that could be things that have happened to people that I know. And it just makes people realize that they're like, okay, she gets it, he gets it. They know what an inclusive culture is because they've said something from the heart. I want a part of that.
And the walls come down.
Yes, exactly.
Because when we start to, those micro doses, when we're giving a little piece of information, we're also telling others we're human too, which I think is such a missed connection when we're at work. And it could be quite scary. I completely agree. Like personally as well, I definitely have a boundary of what I share within my storytelling, because I think there's some things that we should also kind of hold quite sacred to ourselves. And I think that's incredibly powerful at the same time. Within the work environment, I know that questions that I get in relation to building those connections with storytelling is employees wondering whether telling their story is going to put them at a disadvantage, which is incredibly unfortunate. And I completely agree with your point. It goes back to the culture that we're creating in a business. Do we have that psychological safety? You said how people can start small. Do you have any other examples of how they can start small to start and create that culture within a business?
Yeah, so you are right. There are a lot of people, and I've worked with many different organizations that when I've spoken and done focus groups with their employees, they are very reluctant to share their stories because they feel they will be disadvantaged by it. It will hinder their professional development, etc., etc. I worked with one company, sort of a tech company, fairly large, and we specifically spoke around sort of mental health and well-being and how do we open up that conversation. And when I was speaking to some of their employees, actually a lot of them had mental health challenges, had gone through struggles in the past, but they did not want to divulge openly in the organization around that. And that, firstly, right there is where there is an issue, because my question would be, why don't you want to? What are you scared of from your company? And that is already not a nice place to work in if you feel like you can't talk openly about things that you're struggling with because you're afraid of the repercussions of that. So it's around actually educating the leaders of this company, which we did, is talking around, okay, what challenges have you faced? And it's not to force people, just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you have to vocalize it. But actually, if you want to create a culture where people are more open, where you have people just staying, where you're recruiting better people, then you have to share something from you. You can't just expect people to, start talking and be like, okay, this is great culture. You know what I mean? It's like a give and take situation. You have to give something. So it was around just saying, okay, parts that you're comfortable with, what do you want to share? And we had people talk around menopause. We had people talk around sort of anxiety, and just in doses that they're comfortable with, not in front of the organization. It was in terms of like smaller networks that we had, sort of a gender network, mental health network, just sharing in front of a small forum of people so people can actually see, like you said, just see that they're human. And actually, let's get rid of this hierarchy, and we're just people at the end of the day.
What response did you face from the team when you opened the floor with that, when we were actually celebrating people to tell their story?
A lot of silence in the beginning.
Hey, that's real though.
It's real. Nobody wants to go first.
Yeah.
Nobody ever, in any situation, nobody wants to go first because they're scared of what people will think in that moment. So I have to step up and I have to talk around my own story. And then from that, it becomes a little bit easier for people to just give a little bit. And then that person gives a little bit, the next person gives a little bit. And you don't have to say everything in that one go. It's just around saying something. And then long term, it starts to build. And that's what it's all around, it just takes, it just takes a little fraction just to start to really build momentum.
And it sounds as well from what you're saying, we have to be intentional about it and also a little bit patient. It's not going to change overnight. Relationships don't go in the way that I think some people hope for as well. So we have to be continuous and intentional with our relationships. I'm just thinking now, and I'm curious around how we can be more creative with our storytelling. And especially from my perspective, being in the HR industry, I really struggled with how to be creative in such a stale environment and a stale industry, because we aren't seen as creatives like marketing, as an example. So for somebody who's listening, who isn't as creative with their storytelling, how would you advise them in a place to start?
Yeah, so what I really try to do, and it's a bit obscure from what sort of the other consultancies do in terms of, we try to put HR teams and marketing teams together.
Oh, I love that.
And people will think they're in such silos that it's a bit weird to bring them together, but hear me out. So at the end of the day, you want your company to be the best company that it is. And you want, marketing teams are responsible for selling that company externally to audiences, whatever that, if you're selling a service or product, or you're just selling your company as a brand, marketing teams are responsible for that. HR teams, people teams are responsible for obviously internal and the day-to-day runnings of the people within the organization. Now, where there becomes sort of a crack is when your culture is not good, people will leave, and they will vocalize how they felt in that company, whether that's online, whether that's to people that they know. So where you have marketing teams trying to really push your brand and company positively is being completely ruined by the people who work in that organization who then leave and have something negative to say. So, they're just fighting against each other. So what we try to do is we bring HR teams, marketing teams together, not all the time, they don't have to work closely together, but they have to touch base to actually, right, as externally marketing, how do we make sure that from all channels, from all angles, that we are helping to build our brand, that the people who are leaving still have something nice to say about us. And that is around working with the HR teams to say, okay, what works, what doesn't work? How can we address this? And then whatever good stuff comes out of that, we can also shout about, so all of the stuff that HR teams and people teams are doing in terms of mental health, in terms of diversity, in terms of culture, benefits, how do we now push that out alongside of all of our other marketing strategies? I always look at it as that it's one of those things where it has to work together because you need every single message to be positive. And I think that's where creatively they can work together. Now, what we do and what we're sort of experts in is how do we push those in a creative channels in, like you said, more dry environments. And so for those types of messages and what we've done with HR teams and things like mental health and diversity, where they predominantly don't have massive budgets to be able to push those out, is we do creative assets for them. And that's thinking along the lines of just everyday human consumption of information, which is socials. So it's around thinking around wellbeing initiatives, diversity initiatives that we've done for companies, and creating almost like TikTok style videos that we push out, because those are the things that, rather than a policy being pushed out, if people see a video where it's a bit quirky, it's a bit funny, relatable, people are more likely to kind of understand what that journey is about.
The fact that you just said relatable was the first word that also came into my head as you were talking, because sometimes there's such a disconnect and a big association that HR is completely separate, when the reality is we build the employee life cycle, we enable the employee experience, and we really do want to create a great place to work. And I love, finally, that we're having the conversation of how we can be creative, because you're so right. I'm wondering, do you ever get a response of, oh no, I can't do that. I can't tell a story. Like I'm HR, like this is a serious profession. Do you ever get that response?
Yes, all the time. And I don't blame people for it. Again, it's that whole fear thing. It's something new. It's something out of your comfort zone. But the way to address, when we think around how we consume information, and I do a lot of work around change management and how do we, change cultures, and how do we embed key messages. I've worked in situations with companies where they've gone through sort of redundancies and we've had to push those messages out. Now, doing a TikTok is not the right kind of thing for that, but actually it's around how do we utilize modern day consumption of information, which is mainly visual, and how do we utilize that? Because sometimes just sending a word email around news like that is not the way to kind of bring people on that. But actually, if you're checking in with visuals, with lots of information, with FAQs and things like that, that's how you do it. And it doesn't matter what age group you are. When we think around socials, every age group is on them, right? So it's like LinkedIn is, this same as like Instagram. It's all very fun visuals. So it's not we have to be creative to push things because we have younger people. Actually, it's just the way we now consume information as anybody. And that's what I try to get HR people to just think around, is how do you bring day-to-day information and how people look at information into the workplace, because we have to evolve.
Have you seen a change in response from other departments engagement or interaction with an HR function once they see that we're actually humans too. And when we tell our stories, I'm really hoping that as well, this will help to like build relationships with other departments. Do you ever see that?
Not on a granular level, because I don't sort of get involved in that granular detail. I do see it when relationships thrive better when I've worked on bespoke projects with people, and we've had sort of a HR people representative within that. And actually, you can see that people are just aligned to the same thing, that actually there isn't this divide that actually with a HR person, you're more compliance-based or, regulatory-based. Actually, it's just around opening your mind to something a little bit different where other functions in the business will have some ideas and just having a conversation. And that has been what I have witnessed.
Love that. I want to talk about leaders and the role that storytelling can help leaders to build relationships with other employees. I don't know if you've got any examples of when you've helped support an organization to enable their team to tell their story and how it's had a really positive impact on team relationships, especially with leaders and their employees.
Yeah, it comes back to that word that you said, which is so key, which is relatability, right? And again, going back to that whole metaphor around looking at film, reading books and those stories there is when I've done training with leaders in teams is around actually how do you make yourself relatable? And relatable, I think people kind of think that, well, actually, if I'm relatable, I'll have no respect. That's not the case, is that you can be relatable and probably garner more respect from it because people see you as actually you're a very open and honest person. I like how you talk around your struggles in the past. I respect you more. So when I've done training with organizations around this, with leaders, it is around just saying, actually, just speak to people on a human level. It's around meeting them where they're at, whatever scenario those people are, and being individual, right? It really depends how big your team is. If you are a director and you have hundreds of people under you, it's around your sort of direct line reports, working with them, instilling the message within them on how to lead, and then them doing it, and it just funnels down. It's around making sure that, you're able to speak to people as if you would a friend, but still be able to command authority. That if work needs to get done or times need to get tough and you need to get your head down, that people do respect you. And I think people are more likely to respect somebody who stands by their conviction of what the company culture is going to be. So if it's going to be an open, honest place, as a leader, what I say is you have to be open and honest, because the minute that an employee in the organization gets wind that actually they're just lying to us, then the trust in that leader is gone. The trust in sort of the whole exec level or director level is gone. And then the trust in the organization is gone. And rumors spread like wildfire. So it's around what we do in the workshops is we look at what your values are. If they need to be changed, they need to be changed because we need everybody to commit to doing, whether that's integrity, loyalty, trust, collaboration. It's around making sure that every single leader can say yes to each of those values.
And it's got to be shown in practice, lived and breathed.
For sure. For sure. I always think, it's energy, right? And this applies outside of the workplace. I bring a certain type of energy into this room when I come in, vice versa. If I come in happy and bubbly, you're more likely to feel that too. And you're more likely to go out of this room feeling happy and bubbly. If I come in and I am talking, smack and I'm just, in a miserable mood, you're more likely to leave that room. And it's the same in the workplace. You have somebody who is kind of, being sort of dishonest, sort of hiding things, then how can you expect your employees to not be the same?
I completely agree.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And when we do the opposite, the impact is significant, especially when we said we're going to do one thing in particular, or we may have these shiny values on the surface that look great, but below that, it's not great. We're then going to have a huge impact on the team, which of course isn't what any organization wants. It massively disrupts their culture. When it comes to leaders, you spoke then around starting from the top effectively and filtering that down. And that's absolutely the way that any organization should be approaching this. I completely agree. What is your opinion on organizations having boundaries of what they would like employees to talk about as part of their storytelling?
The questions I would ask is why, for what reasons do you want boundaries? There could actually be legitimate reasons, right? There has to be a certain type of control that you have. You can't have people just spouting things out, and that's why, when we see on social media, people say, my views are not representative of the company that I work for. That's totally fair. There has to be a level of control around what an individual talks around. From sort of a brand point of view, protecting the brand. But in all is, I think, again, it starts from whatever you're kind of talking around, you want people to convey that same type of message. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking around inclusivity and you're talking around open cultures, you would expect and want and hope that your employees were talking around something similar as well. If you want a more diverse, more open conversation on mental health, as leaders, talk around the experiences yourself, and that can hopefully instill other people to do that. There's always a question, as I'm probably sure that you've seen, around people talking on LinkedIn, and sharing their stories on there, and, how does that impact the workplace? I personally don't see an issue with that, because depending on what they're messaging and what they're talking around, it can only be a good thing. It can only be a good thing for the company, where people are looking at that, people who don't work in that organization, where they look at somebody who is talking around well-being, talking around diversity, and thinking, actually, they're comfortable to do that, and they work for X company. I want to get in on that. I'd like to go work for them.
There's so many perks as well of doing that when it comes to recruitment.
Yes.
A lot of companies on LinkedIn now have built their personal brand through storytelling. They've also really enabled and encouraged their team to tell their story and enhance their personal brand, where companies don't have to go through a huge recruitment drive anymore. Instead, they will do one post and they will be flooded because they're showing online through storytelling the reality of being an employee with their company and how they can get on board with the vision of the company. I'm seeing so many good things from large companies that are absolutely smashing it.
Yeah. We've worked with a few recruitment companies where when they're working with their clients, they will sort of archaically, they would gift, champagne and, these package boxes. Actually, now they gift like a workshop with us where we can talk around storytelling, because actually you're right. It helps with retention. Because when people show up, then people are more open and people want to work for an open company. And it helps with recruitment, because the best way that we can tell stories in an engaging, captivating way, it's basically free marketing. Do you know what I mean? If you're getting employees to feel confident and comfortable and want to talk around working for your organization, then, you're not spending anything on that. You're spending minimal just to train people on how to tell a story, which will not only benefit the company, but it also benefits the individual. And because they're getting something from that, they're more likely to jump on that.
The social landscape that we're in now is the reality as well, in my opinion. And I do think employers are really missing out. So hopefully we have some listening to this episode and they can see how positive it can be as well. And yes, we are shifting more to a technological way of working. We've got hybrid working, we've got remote working. And I do think there's a thread, though, between still having that in-person storytelling, as much as, yes, definitely use platforms like LinkedIn in a professional way to talk about your story. But there's also a really key piece here to that in-person interaction. And if I think of my experience as an HR professional, there are particular topics that can feel very taboo, like mental health, and it can help having a manager who can empathize. And storytelling is a perfect way that I personally think leaders can start to open the conversation more. Of course, we're there to signpost and support where we can, but we can also start to make employees feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I have been in many sort of facilitating many types of workshops with different clients, and we've sort of been in a room face to face, and you can tell from the beginning that there are particular individuals who just don't gel a little bit, that there's some sort of hidden frustration there. And you can tell that by the way that they sort of speak to each other and just how sort of body language. And what we do is we get people to open up as much as they want to. Mm-hmm. And then by the end, what you see is that, people will never say it directly, but you can feel that actually they understand that person a bit more, that actually maybe those quirks that they have, or maybe they were a bit standoffish, or, maybe they were quite abrupt. Actually, maybe because there's reasonings behind that. And then you become much more compassionate, empathetic, and understanding. And that's where those barriers start to break down.
I'm just thinking as well, in situations that I've encountered, when people have shared their story with me and I've potentially not understood why, things are going the way they are, I've then given them much more grace and understanding at the same time. And that definitely relates to the workplace, because I've then got better relationships with that person. I'm much more understanding, and they also understand me a lot better, which goes back to the whole how we can take the creativity of storytelling and bake that into working environments for a better future of work. I do think it's possible.
Oh, 100%. I think it is.
So sadly, I'm going to have to ask only one more question.
Okay. Oh, it's going fast.
I know, super fast. And this is, we need another conversation, I feel, because we could just keep going. The final question that I've got is, looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
Just continue to believe in yourself. I look back, and probably when I look back, it's those moments where I spent so much time doubting myself, having low self-esteem, and actually it comes back. If I knew that other people in the rooms or in the environments that I was in was going through something similar, I may have felt reassured. It's around just believing in yourself, trusting your gut, that, no matter who you are, if you're a HR individual who has an idea and you think it's going to work and you think it is the right thing, go with that. Because there's nothing worse than not trusting your intuition and then feeling like you regret that.
That's such a poignant message to end on, because I know so many other HR people, I definitely relate to that. And I know so many of our listeners will as well. We do need to believe in ourselves more, and we also need to talk about that a lot more. Thank you so much for coming on our episode. I've loved this conversation, and we need to keep it going.
Totally.
Thanks again. Bye.